Hey guys, I am talking to Wayne Bauman. Wayne and I have known each other for, probably 20 years or more, maybe more than 20 years.
Yeah.
I first met Wayne and his wife on the softball field. He was going to a different church, and our churches were playing each other, and somebody on our softball team heard that Wayne and his wife were heading to the mission field. And so the long story of that is that our church began to support Wayne and Belinda and their kids as they traveled to Papua New Guinea. And they were with the Arumba tribe. And then after 10 years of that, Wayne and Belinda felt called to come back to the States. Wayne got another degree, got a Master of Divinity degree, started doing some pastoral work, some chaplain work. And Wayne and I kept our friendship up. In fact, we moved to Montgomery County at the same time that they moved back into Westminster, Maryland. So we were kind of close, at least a lot closer than Annapolis and Papua New Guinea. So we continued to hang out. And at one point here at Oakdale, we were looking for a facilities manager. And I was having lunch with Wayne and realized he was a facilities manager for another church. And I said, Wayne, you need to come work for us. And so anyway, Wayne came. What year was that, Wayne? Do you remember?
2017, I believe.
All right. So 2017, that Wayne came on staff. And that was basically right about the same time that we were trying to figure out what God was going to do with us and where our focus was going to be. And we were trying to focus on making disciples or disciple making.
Yep.
And Wayne, I think you had said to me that you had a sense for a long time. I'm just going to put this in here, but you had a sense for a long time or a vision maybe, I think for a while, that God was moving you towards something. Do you remember what that was that you told me? I don't want to tee it up.
You're going to have to tee it up because my memory's so bad. I can't remember.
I remember
yesterday.
You talking about house churches a long time ago.
House churches? Yeah. The vision for house churches, I think, grew out of, I'm not a fan of the branded church that's going on in America right now. I think for me, having lived overseas, if it's not reproducible around the world, that was something that I tried to move away from. And so I thought the house church would be reproducible around the world, and it's done in many parts of the world already. So That's kind of the reason I went that direction.
So here I am pastoring this, what we call now Legacy Church, in Legacy Church, meaning just, it's a part of the Western cultural Christendom kind of picture. And Wayne and I have these vigorous conversations about theology. And anyway, but Wayne comes to work at Oakdale at the same time that we're really pursuing a focus on making disciples. I guess, Wayne, you read the book with us, 4 Disciplines of Execution.
Yep.
And then we spent a year as a staff, 23 of us in the same room every week, arguing about what a disciple was, what would discipleship look like. And we created out of that, finally, after a year, came up with some definitions, created a path and a process, and we were working that path and the process. And what I really want to get to, though, is in 2019, you were doing some research around some disciple-making things, and I think you ran into, I can never remember how to say his first name, online Shadanka Johnson. Was it Shadanka Johnson?
I think it's something similar to that. Yes, and he had a diagram. And in the diagram, there were 5 different illustrations or maybe 6 different illustrations. And it was something that was very intriguing to me. And at the same time, Anne had run across Wig Take when she was looking up wig online.
And what's Wig Take?
What's it going to take?
What's it going to take? Okay.
Yeah.
We were dealing with WIG, which is wildly important goal. And she was searching for that and came upon Wig Take, which is really, what's it going to take?
Yep.
What's it going to take to see God's mission accomplished kind of thing?
Exactly. And that led us to Chris, and I can't pronounce his name, Chris down in
Galanos.
Texas, that guy.
Yeah.
And
So my
he
side
was
of that story.
offering, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say my side of that story is that in January of 2020, Ann came into my office and said, 3 of us on staff want to take this training that's being offered down in Texas. She didn't even tell me who. I don't even know if she said it was. I think it was you and Amy and her.
Okay.
And you might have been the first person that mentioned it. And then Ann had run across something. And anyway, so Ann comes in and says this to me. She says, 3 of us on staff want to take this training, but it feels like it might be like a bullet train. And I don't know how we'll ever get off of it. And I said to her, well, if you feel like it's that important, let's all do it. What had you said? You had gone to Ann because you wanted to take the training personally.
Yes, I went to Ann asking her if this is something that I would be allowed to do, because she was put over the whole wig thing. I can't remember what her new role was when she came back on. And so I asked her if this would be something that I personally saw as being very challenging as far as the Western perspective of doing church. And I said, this is something I'd like to do. Can I get permission to do this as part of my staff training? And I think that's when maybe she had either talked to Amy or somebody else and then went to you. So, yeah.
All right. And so I basically say, let's all do it, because it was in the middle of the day. I think that's why you were asking about it. It was in the middle of the workday. And so we all do it. And how did that training, I mean, none of us knew what we were getting into, but how did the disciple making movement training impact you?
I thought this is the answer I've been looking for. It had so many elements that I thought was missing in the traditional church planting models that I've seen in missions as well as here in the States. The idea that it's got to be based on scripture, it's got to be focused in prayer. Without prayer, it's not going to succeed. And all the things in it were reproducible in other cultures. It didn't take a lot of money. It didn't take a lot of glitz and show. It was just something very simple and easily reproducible. And I was like, this is it.
Yeah. So we all got excited about this. Then the pandemic hit, and we had a tool that we could use that didn't require big, expensive buildings. And it was, as you say, very reproducible. And it didn't have to be, you didn't need a lot of highly trained, seminary trained people to do it. This was a movement that could be led by God's people with or without official or a formal training. And so we're trying to, we just said, God, this is amazing. And we launched into it. But that also began to work because God had been working in you around this house church movement, not liking the very expensive and attractional model that the church is using in the US or in the West, and seeing that there's no way to export that across the world because they don't have the resources that we do. And it's not even working that well here. The truth is it's not working that well in the West. And so you ended up leaving Oakdale, and part of the leaving Oakdale was around what God was showing us around disciple making.
Yes. I did what I promised my wife I would never do again. I quit my job without having another one. And just to make sure I stayed true to my word, you told me my days were numbered at Oakdale, which was very good because I needed that. But yeah, my desire was, okay, if I'm going to be making disciples in a community, I need to be in my community. And because I was commuting an hour down to Olney, I had no connections in this community. So yeah, I left Oakdale, started looking for work. I got a part-time position at Lowe's, which I am still working at and still building relationships there. And I think it's going well. And I'm also part-time pastoring in what would be considered a legacy church, the I'm probably the youngest person in the church by a good 20 years. So that's a real legacy.
Yeah. Well, but when you left, this is what you said to us. When you left, you said, I don't want to go back and work in a church. I want to go work in a place where I can create relationships with people in the world, marketplace kind of place, like Lowe's, develop relationships and invite them to discover God's word through a discovery Bible study or whatever process it might be. But the church kind of came up and you felt called to apply for that. So you're pastoring part-time. But here's what I love about that story. You told me that when, you went to this church, about 25, 30 people at the church, you went to interview there, and the church asked you what any church is going to ask a pastor, right? What are you going to do to grow this church? And what did you say to them?
I said, somebody once said to me, Jesus never said, grow my church. He said, make disciples. I will build my church. And I appreciate that because that's what I shared with them. And they realized that going into this, I'm not a guy who's going to be bringing in a dog and pony show trying to grow the church. We're going to be focusing on making disciples. So that was very encouraging that they still said yes.
I was going to say, they hired you anyway.
They surely did.
And you've introduced the Discovery Bible Study process to them?
Yes. So for about 9 months now, we've been doing discovery studies. It's a bit of a modified format because they want to do it every other week. So we do it the first and third Wednesdays of the month and the second and fourth Sundays, just to give opportunity for more people. The Sundays, unfortunately, we only have about an hour, so it's really shortened. I've been thinking through that beginning next year, we're probably going to get rid of the Sunday option because we don't have enough time to do it, and it's just going to be Wednesdays only.
And what are you doing? You told me that you were going to do something in November at the church during the services. What can you talk a little bit about that?
We actually started this past Sunday. So what I'm doing is I'm preaching a very short sermon, even by my standards. It's about a 10-minute sermon. And then we're actually practicing having discovery groups in the sanctuary on Sunday mornings. And they run about 10 or 15 minutes. So last week, we got through the first two questions. What is it that you're excited about? What is it that's stressing you out? And I think some of the groups may have gotten past the, what can we do to help? Anything that we can do to help with the situation.
And then, so your hope is, you told me, I think something like the goal is, or your hope is that if even one discovery group got started out of the church with people who are not a part of church, maybe not even don't even know Jesus, that would be a win.
Yes. I think if one person latches onto this, it's definitely a win. That's what I'm praying for. And God can do much more than that if he chooses to. But I would be very excited if even one person decides, you know what, this is something I can do.
Wayne, having been here with us for the discussion about disciple making before we knew anything about disciple making movements, before the pandemic, just being in that year where we were banging our head against the wall, what is a disciple? What are we trying to do? How do we create a path and a process? I would just love, I don't know if I've ever even asked you, for you to talk about what you've seen happen and how, think about the conversations that were happening in that room then with all of us as staff, and then how things changed for you or what you observed in us after we did the 8-week disciple making movement training. Any thoughts about that?
It's interesting because I do remember trying to hammer out the path and the process, and I was always the one that was gumming things up.
That's, I think, your gifting. You have the gift of gumming.
I am a gummy bear.
Yeah.
But I think the entire focus changed. It wasn't so much about what we as Oakdale can do to enhance Oakdale. It's what we at Oakdale can do to send out people. And these people are specifically looking at making disciples. In other words, it's not about building the name of Oakdale. It's about building the kingdom. And I think that to me was a huge change that I saw.
It's a scary change, though. I think you're right. I think that, from the pastor's chair, as you now sit, you've got a lot of pressure to keep the budget going and growth going. And, that's the expectation. And so we want to build God's kingdom, but we think the way to build God's kingdom is building our kingdom. And hopefully our kingdom will build his kingdom. God says that's kind of the reverse. You trust me. I mean, what does he say? Is it Matthew 6:33? Seek first my kingdom, and all of the other things will be added to you. So we, in disciple making, you really are giving up on any building of your own brand. You're not trying to advance your brand. You're trying to advance God's kingdom and just trusting that God will take care of your needs in the middle of that. So we do almost become everyday missionaries. We're just saying, God, you just use us however you want in the world that we live in. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think you're right. And I think that's one of the things that I got when I was working on my master's degree. The one thing I loved about the missional movement was the idea that we're all on mission with God. It's not reserved just for those people who have a degree, those people who have studied. We're all on mission with God. Now, how do we respond to that mission with God? That's, I think, where the church needs to investigate more. And I think the DMM is an excellent resource for doing that.
If you knew before you went to spend 10 years in Papua New Guinea, if you knew then what you now know, what would you have done differently?
Oh, my goodness. Well, part of it is celebrate recovery. I'm a different person emotionally and spiritually because of celebrate recovery, but also with the disciple making model. See, I think in places like Papua New Guinea that it would take off like wildfire. And I wish I had known back when we first started in New Guinea. And I've even talked to missionaries recently who are in an Islamic country, and they said they've heard of the DMM. I don't know if they've been practicing it, but they've actually heard about DMM when I talked about a disciple-making movement. Yeah, they actually connected it to DMM.
That's awesome. I do see this is affecting a lot of the world. I mean, when we went through the training, I think there were 1,800 movements, verified movements across the globe. We just were in a meeting, some of us the other day, where one of the main researchers that's looking into movements, we're over 2,000 movements, and that's just in 3 years. That's how much. So there's just, and movements, again, by definition, have to be 4 generations deep. That's, grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, that kind of generational deep, 4 streams, 4 generations, multiplying out, reproducing themselves. So it's not a small thing for a movement to happen or to get to a movement. And the fact that they're multiplying as fast as they are, it really is amazing. And the average movement has, I think we were hearing the other day, 50 to 100,000 people in it.
Wow.
And so isn't that amazing? I mean, you think about if we could get movement started in the U.S., disciple-making movement started in the U.S., and the average movement in the U.S. was, 50 to 100,000 people. Whew, that's amazing. And it really is amazing.
Exciting. It's interesting that you mentioned that. Wait a minute, I had a senior moment. I can't remember where I was going with all that.
Was it teeing off the numbers 50 to 100,000, or was it something else?
It had the idea of movement. Movement in the U.S. So one of the things when I was presenting last week to the congregation about this, I said, you know who the hardest people in the world to do this with? And they said, who? I said, church people.
Right.
And it is not easy.
No, because we're used to church in a particular way. We've defined what it means to be the church in a certain way. But and that's what's so exciting to me about disciple-making movement principles is that not only are they reproducible, and what we've talked about often is the difference between addition and multiplication. The church model that we're in, it at best does addition. It doesn't do multiplication well. In fact, that we've quoted this before, I think the average, one researcher did some research, it's the average cost of a baptism in the West is like $1.5 million. All of the money that we spend on budgets and buildings and all the rest of that, programs and advertising, technology, all of that ends up being about $1.5 million per baptism. And that's not reproducible anywhere. That's not really even reproducible here. It shouldn't require money at all for there to be, a movement of disciple making. And I think that's what's happening through disciple making movement and the training. What do you see happening in terms of your life? I'm just interested in, where do you see this taking you in terms of the next couple of years? Do you have a sense of what God's opening before you?
Well, it's very interesting. I don't have a sense. Today, I got word that nobody was happy with this past Sunday.
Okay. You're making church people unhappy.
It came through the church grapevine. People have been researching or investigating. And so it's interesting that it came very graciously, but it's like, people are saying they're not going to come back. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And so I've been struggling with asking God, okay, God, what is the right thing to do here? Because it's a congregation of 25. If they have 2 or 3 people leave a congregation of 25, it's chaos in their world, So it's church people not happy with making disciples. They want to go to church. They want what they want. And it's like, okay, God.
They want what they're used to.
Yes. And so what are you calling me to do here, meaning with these people? And so I don't know. I don't have an answer yet.
Yeah, that's good.
So
I
at
think
this point, Lowe's is still on the front burner unless he changes that too.
Yeah. I think that helping churches to transition and change models is one of the most difficult things ever. And it's one of the hindrances that we have, I think, because the model tends to be generation specific. And then, so what happens is we get a generation and we're doing things in the way that they like it, but then other generations maybe don't relate to that model as well. And so trying to figure out whether we need to do this in terms of new church planting or whether there's possible for churches to transition to different models is an open question that I know all of us are struggling with. And certainly the people at Oakdale can talk about how they feel like they've been through some model changes themselves. In fact, I just heard this Sunday that there was a guy that came back to church within the last couple of weeks at Oakdale, and that he had been here 5 years ago. And he said basically, I feel like it's a totally different church today than it was 5 years ago. And I think he meant that as a compliment, because he said, I feel at home here now. I didn't feel that at home before. And so it's a very interesting comment. I mean, the problem is there are people who felt at home here 5 years ago that now don't feel as home at home. And so it's always a hard thing to try and figure out how to be obedient to God. And that's the hard thing. Hey, God, I want to be obedient to you.
Yep.
Not everybody's going to like it. Not everybody's going to say yes to it. Not everybody is going to agree with it. And so who am I going to serve? That's always a hard question.
And that's a good question to ask, right?
It's an easy question up here, but it's a hard question here. And sometimes even in your wallet, it's a hard question.
That's where it always gets sticky there.
Well, Wayne, I want to give you a few minutes to say anything that you want about your experience of disciple making here, how we originally were focused on I think the way I talked about it, maybe not everybody, but I wanted to see Oakdale Church become a disciple making factory with the assumption is people were going to come in, we were going to create a path and a process, and we were going to help them disciple them. And then we got into this disciple making training, and all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, we don't want people to come in. We want people to go out, because disciple making happens more in the world than it does in simply sitting in a building that we call church. I would love to just hear any thoughts that you have. You're one of you love the Lord and love His word more than most people I know, and I certainly value your heart and opinion on these things. So what would you say about any of those things?
Oh, that's very gracious of you to say. I am excited by the idea that there are people all around the country who are catching on to this idea of disciple making, that the focus is no longer inside but outside. And I struggle with that personally. My makeup is I would rather sit down with a book and read than interact with people I don't know. So this is a God thing, this change that's going on in me. And I get it. Not everybody's going to want it. I don't know that initially I wanted it, but it's something that he's doing. I'm just excited to be around to see what he's doing. I mean, I think of the time in history like Wesley and at other times where God used a method that was easily reproducible, and he started to change the world. And
Yeah.
that was my focus this past Sunday. What is God's greatest desire? And the only thing that I could think of, his greatest desire, is restored relationships with people who run away from him as soon as they can, and he's done everything possible, and he's waiting for us to be the one to turn around. And so it's just amazing. And so to see this happening, like I said, it's starting here in the States, just from the few connections I've had with you and others who are doing this. Seeing what God is doing is just amazing. And so, Lord willing, it's going to continue in ways that are unimaginable.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Wayne, you know what? I'm really personally glad that you were on staff and you were you were really a big part of helping us to get through this. Your voice was well known in the 23 as you gummied everything up, or you got you made everything sticky. But I think that you were unwilling to settle for pat answers, and sometimes you were the devil's advocate to the place where we wanted to crucify the devil, meaning you. But the reality is that that your experience, I think, overseas, the personality that you have, and the experiences you've had, just made it really helpful for us to have another voice helping us process this out. So our celebration, this WIG celebration that we're in the middle of, that God, and here's the thing, I know you remember this, Wayne, when we thought about sending 1,200 disciple makers out, it was all local. It was all about what God was going to do right here in Olney, Maryland, or in Maryland somehow. We were not realizing that God had bigger plans for us, that it was going to involve Kenya and all sorts of other places. So we couldn't have known then what God was inviting us to. We were just saying, oh, God, if there's any way you could get 1,200 people that we would impact somehow here. And, the end up number, I don't know exactly. I think it's over 1,500, maybe closer to 1,600. And we didn't think we would make 1,200. But the reality is less than 400 of those folks are right here in Maryland.
Wow.
The majority of them are in the U.S. and and overseas, that came through missionaries, that came through opportunities, doors that God opened. And you remember the story of Samuel, who emailed us just randomly from Kenya, and God has just done amazing things there. So anyway, I'm glad. Thank you for taking the time to let me talk with you about that, and for being a part of Oakdale for the season that you were there. And we're going to keep praying for Linwood Brethren Church, and for we want, I think, one discovery group happening at Lowe's. When can we expect that to happen?
It's a great question. I will let you know when it gets put on the schedule. But no, thank you. Thank you for this invitation, but also thank you for the invitation to come to Oakdale, because I believe I know it was God's leading. It was necessary for me, and I'm glad that Oakdale profited as well.
Well, and I would be remiss if I didn't also say, because you said it earlier, and I'm grateful for that too, that Celebrate Recovery has done a lot of healing in a lot of our lives, and really has helped. I think Rick Warren once said that Saddleback isn't really the way to grow your church, but it's a way to grow your leaders, and it really does grow a lot of strength and health and vitality into a leadership team. And so praise the Lord for all that. And I am glad that we had this chance, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much.